a lecture on G20 in association with Indian Council of Social Science Research, ICSSR, on the topic G20 Presidency and its global effect. We are delighted to have you here with us today. We'd like the audience to be ready with their questions and give it to the volunteers. The best twin detectors will be rewarded. Also, everyone is requested to please keep their phones silent.
Light is a symbol of brightness and prosperity. As sunlight expels the darkness of the night, similarly, blessings bring in a light, prosperity, and happiness. To make the evening a blessed one, let us invoke Goddess Saraswati with a performance of Saraswati Vandana by Monica, Akriti, Priyanka, Shivangi, Gargi, and Kushi from Alaya, the Indian Classical Music Society of Daulat College.
I invite our principal and patron, Professor Sarita Roy, our vice principal, Professor Sarita Nanda, our TIC, Dr. Deekshika Mahanta Gautamaru, to accompany our esteemed guests, Professor Nilaman Tiwari, Professor Amitabh Bhattu, and Dr. Abhishek Tandon to finish the land.
Sharda Bande Sharda, Sharda Bande Sharda, Sharda Bande Sharda. Shwet Hans Viharini Shwet Hans Viharini Shwet Hans Viharini Madhura Veena Dharini Madhura Veena Dharini Atma Jyoti Prasarini Atma Jyoti Prasarini Murti Bhanav Shobhita Sharda Bande Sharda Sharda Bande Sharda Sharda Bande Sharda Sharda Bande Sharda Bande Sharda Sharda Bande Sharda Sharda Bande Sharda.
With the lighting of this lamp, may darkness be replaced by light, ignorance by knowledge, and sorrow by happiness.
Bha derived from Bhava, Ra from Raga, Ta from Tal, and Natyam meaning dance. Thus, Bharatanatyam is the dance that encompasses music, rhythm, and expression. With this, we'd like to call upon stage Deva Priya, Jyotika, and Kalyani from IHER, the Indian Classical Dance Society of Daulat College, for a special performance.
I didn't set that application. So I don't know. I don't think they are sent. Actually, I should have to play from off. I'll have to play from off. They haven't sent the song. This one. Nice. Ready?
वक्रतुण्डमहाकाय सूर्यकोटिसमप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। गणनायकाय गणदैवताय गणाध्यक्षाय धीमहि गुणशरीराय गुणवन्दिताय गुणेशानाय धीमहि गुणातीताय गुणाधीशाय गुणप्रविष्टाय धीमहि एकदन्ताय वक्रतुण्डाय गौरीतनयाय धीमहि गणेशाय भालचन्द्राय श्रीगणेशाय धीमहि गानचतुराय गानप्राणाय गानान्तरात्मने गानोत्सुकाय गानभक्ताय गानोत्सुकमनसे गुरुपूजिताय गुरुदैवताय गुरुकुलस्थायिने गुरुविक्रमाय बीजप्रवराय गुरवे गुणगुरवे गुरुदैत्यकलक्षेत्रे गुरुदैवजनाराध्याय गुरुपुत्रपरित्रात्रे गुरुपाखण्डखण्डकाय गीतकाराय गीततत्त्वाय गीतपुत्राय धीमहि गूढगुल्पाय गन्धवत्साय गोजयगदाय धीमहि गुणातीताय गुणाधीशाय गुणप्रविष्टाय धीमहि एकदन्ताय वक्रतुण्डाय गौरीतनयाय धीमहि गजेशानाय भालचन्द्राय श्रीगणेशाय धीमहि एकदन्ताय वक्रतुण्डाय गौरीतनयाय धीमहि गजेशानाय भालचन्द्राय श्रीगणेशाय
That was a beautiful performance. Thank you, Team Anand.
Please don't move the camera. It was moved out of my hand. Relax the volume. We'll move the flowers also. Tamanna, can one of you also just move this podium a little bit? It's coming like this.
So, Indian Tourism Department, please escort our guests on the stage.
To the back. I don't know.
Now we would like to welcome our esteemed guests. We would request our principal, Professor Savita Roy, to extend a token of welcome to our chief guest, Professor Hira Muthiwala.
Like from here, like can you grab it? Tavina, because with the bigger can you just put it under the right now? No, just put it like stand it under these flowers. Otherwise it looks very dirty.
We request our Vice Principal, Professor Sarika
I'll
Nanda,
brush it off.
to extend a token of gratitude to the distinguished speaker, Professor Anata Mattu.
We would request our teacher in charge, Dr. Deepika Mahanta, to extend a gracious welcome to our principal, Professor Savita Roy, and our vice principal, Professor Sarita Nanda.
It's okay once they put it.
The teacher in charge of our department, Dr. Deepika Mahanta Gautamwale, is our guiding light. She is immensely kind, understanding, and is always smoothly dressed to cross hurdles in the most effective manner. Over to you now.
This is so much of kind words for me. Thank you so much for that. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Department of English, Daulat College, I extend a hearty welcome to all our dignitaries and our esteemed guests. It is immensely significant that the Indian Council of Social Science Research, Delhi, is carrying forward this initiative for a development dialogue in the campuses of higher education institutions and for creating our country as one of the most in the world by 2047. The vision of Visit Bharat 2047 itself is extremely significant for all of us. So, on behalf of Daulat College fraternity, I extend my gratitude to Professor Dhananjay Singh, Member Secretary ICSSR Delhi, for making this event possible. Now, G20, the group of G20 comprises almost all the significant countries around the world, and G20 member countries currently account for more than 80% of the world GDP, 70%, 75% of the global trade, and 60% of the global population. And India's presidency of G20 is a landmark achievement of a country in the international political scenario, which has a ripple effect on diverse aspects of our collective existence. It has broadened our global reach, and academically, this will create a conducive atmosphere of various international academic collaborative research and path-breaking findings. In the fields of diverse physical sciences, it will boost up the spirit of innovation and invention. We are also hopeful that G20 will be seminal in opening avenues for more fruitful economic ties, leading to enhanced economic activities both in the world of business as well as in academia. Another significant contribution of G20 can be to open newer dimensions of learning, indigenous systems of knowledge, and strengthen the necessary bonding of the traditional with a new age scientific temperament and pursuits. In the field of literature, history, philosophy, psychology, and other branches of humanities, it will envisage a new dimension for translation studies, for cultural studies, for historical narratives, explorations of the human mind and society with a heightened interest. Our country has always played a pivotal role in leading the world in moments of crisis, in moments of the liberation of the mind that requires a momentum. So our forefathers have understood the highest human existence, highest ideal of human existence rather, as universal brotherhood. So one earth, one family, one future. And at this crucial political-economic juncture of the world, this message carries loads of hope and inspiration to strive for a better future. Our distinguished guests have truly inspirational background in terms of their academic and other activities. Professor Heramat Tiwari has an illustrious career, a very distinguished professor from the School of Social Sciences and the School of Sanskrit and Indian Studies. Is also a scholar par excellence. Is currently the professor and chairperson, Center of Historical Studies and Associate Dean, School of Social Sciences, DNU. Is the honorary director of ICSSR Northern Regional Center. He served as a senior professorial fellow for the Israel Institute of Advanced Studies. He is also the lifetime senior professional fellow of the European Institute of Advanced Studies in Paris. Henrik Zimmer, of Professor of Indian Philosophy and Intellectual History, and he is the UGC nominee of the Governing Council of the Indian Council of Historical Research, Ministry of Education. He has published numerous articles and books in India, memory names, and the means of knowing an ancient India a historical philosophical perspective. Currently, he has 12 PhD students working under him, so he has a very illustrious, very significant, very inspiring career. Professor Macho is a very distinguished guest for us, and we are privileged, we are honored to have you here with us, sir. He has been awarded the Padma Shri, one of India's highest civilian award by the President of India. His contribution to education and public life. He has been a professor, School of International Studies, JNU. He is the chair of Center of International Politics, Organization, and the Government Studies. And I looked at the series of both are distinguished guests, and they are so long, that I do not know where to start and where to finish. So only highlighting some of the things. He has been continuously working for this government for peace, and he has also been the founder director of Australia Indian Institute, founding co-chair of the Australian Leadership Dialogue. He was a member of the National Knowledge Commission. He was also a member of the task force constituted by the Prime Minister on Global Strategic Developments. He is one of the few academics, and this is a very distinguished and prestigious service that he has been doing for the country, for all of us, that he has been one of the few academics who has bridged the gap between academia and public policy. We are so honored to have you with us, sir. Dr. Abhishek Tendon, he is an associate professor at the Department of Operational Research. He is not here. He promised that he will join us in between. Yeah. Let's listen to the experts and the fellows who have introspected and worked on various nuances of the G20 presidency. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It is always a delight to listen to you.
A principal and patron, Professor Savita Roy is a symbol of endurance and courage. Please join us in extending a warm welcome to our principal. We are privileged to have you here with us today, and we are eager to hear your inspiring words now.
Ma'am, this one, this stream.
So, I would like to welcome the distinguished guests, Professor Mattu and Professor Hirani Tiwari to Daulat College. This is the area where the future is shaped, I must say, and it is very appropriate that ICSSR should come down to colleges and interact with the young minds so that they also have an idea of where we are going, and you will also have an idea what is the expectation of India. So this, I think, is the most appropriate for interacting, for understanding the young and mixing what is happening in the global world. Sir, you require no introduction, in fact. So, without much ado, I think we should listen to him first, and then we will have an interactive session. Welcome to you, sir.
It's not there.
Thank you, ma'am. Your presence and your words make every difference.
Professor Hiram Tiwari is the Honorary Director, ICSSR, Northern Regional Center, Associate Dean. He needs no introduction.
So thank you very much for those kind words, Haji. Before coming here, Professor Mattu and I were discussing what he said. The chief guest should always be at the end. But I'm always uncomfortable to be invited as chief guest. I like either as an audience or as a speaker, which is my vocation. That is the source of my bread and butter. And this is one. So, and before that, I want to say we're very sorry that we have kept you waiting for a while. 10 odd minutes we were late and stuck in the traffic. And the third thing that I wanted to say that we as professionals of words, language, should never be introduced in words. I believe a teacher should be introduced after she speaks, the audience would come to know. So it's always very, very embarrassing when you read out the CV, because in CV we put all kinds of things, or various, things.
Children should know who they are going to
That's so probably I'll talk about myself, so that will be one important thing. And the next thing that I want to say that it is always a pleasure to be with Amitabh. We have been friends since 1988. We bumped into each other in Oxford University. I'm not dropping names here. This is where I met him, and I have always found him kind of course, he's polymath. You could read his CV. What one thing that was missed out in his introduction was that I wanted the book to be displayed.
Yeah.
One thing that was missed out for his introduction, which I thought I was very happy that I would have the opportunity to do that. He was and still remains the youngest vice chancellor that this country has produced. At the he turned 40 in July, and September he was the vice chancellor of Jammu University for 2 terms. In fact, it's well beyond 2 terms. And he has been on numerous committees, so there is no way that you can equate his name with me. I'm only a little older, a few months older to him in age. Otherwise, I'm dwarfed by his knowledge. As I said, he is a polymath, a doyen in international politics, international relations. I can think of, I have a little interest in politics. We're all politicians, we vote. And otherwise, also, one is active. I can't think of a better IR, or as it is called, international relations person, not only in India but in the world. Kind of work that he's been doing. When we met, I think we both of us were very, very young, unmarried. Now we are old fogies, both of us married with children. We have time, much more time to waste, and in after 10 o'clock, and God knows when we'll go to bed, as it always happens in the hostel. So he, of course, right from the very first meeting, impressed me. I have a very vivid photograph of Amitabh not walking on the street of Oxford Broad Street in his Indian Band Gala, which is, he is in a foreign dress and tie, very nice Band Gala, and somebody introduced me to him. And then after that, of course, we have been friends through thick and thin. He is a very loyal friend, very loyal teacher, a kind teacher. Now, I wanted to discuss, not because I really am no expert in this area. I wanted to make 2 or 3 points. One is that in a college like this, and since I'm also representing ICSSR, which is why I said there was no question of chief guest, I'm just a lackey, sidekick of Ahmed today. Yeah. So, in the sense that the subject that has been chosen is the one where he can speak most eloquently anywhere at any platform anywhere in the world. And mind you, when I'm saying that he has chaired sessions where Nobel laureates have spoken in Harvard, in Stanford, of course. He remains in many places a visiting professor or a light fellow. He has written lately, and we have been discussing, because I know very little. And my subject is Sanskrit, Indian philosophy, intellectual history, which is a sort of fashionable way of associating myself with history department in a way. But that's what I do. I found him extremely interested, not from today, but from Oxford days, that is 88, 89 onwards. He did his PhD, I know, campaign for disarmament, nuclear disarmament rather. And I know in last 3 decades, much water has flowed down the bridge in Thames as well as in Yamuna here, bridge, and he has changed his position from disarmament to a very calibrated way of maintaining one's security through nuclear weapon. That is one area, but there are so many areas. Lately, he started thinking and writing on the area of diplomacy, international relations, in the sense how do you develop a country's image, not only politically but economically, but otherwise, most importantly, in terms of making your positions very, very clear. And that brings me to the point of the area where I can talk for hours, if you like. How do you really contact and communicate with people? The idea of diplomacy, the idea of international trade, economic trade, for me, is nothing but conversation. So it is the idea of conversation which takes me back to the old ages. Let me connect you from the Rig Veda throughout the century. The conversation or dialogue or debate or vada is something that has been extremely important. This book is coming out, I think, next week. He generously gave me the preview of the book, which I am looking forward to reading, and I'll ask him to gift it to me. I'm not going to buy it. And this is something that he's talking about here. He has taken on the subject, which is in fact discussed much after he wrote the book by our foreign minister, external affairs minister, prime minister, how actually you communicate to the foreign dignitaries, to different land, even to your neighbor, if there is a division. And that conversation takes us to a point, how do you craft your ideas, how do you present them? And philosophically and in intellectual discourse, conversation makes a very powerful basis. What is the power of communication in the Rig Veda, for example? If you look at it eschatologically, that it is all religious texts and rituals, that is one way of looking at it. A student like me would look at it, what I can glean from it for my field. This is what in social sciences and humanities we do. I invoke a great scholar of his land, Kashmir. Wonderful treatise on debates and dialogues. And he opens it up by saying, in this book, if you expect something new, I'm sorry, you should not. He said, where can I get you new dialogue, new subject? Therefore, whatever I'm going to say here or I have said in the book, if you wrote the introduction later, as we normally do, is nothing but the paraphrase of what has already been said. This then takes me to the point, what do we draw from our past? So in the Rig Veda then, if Jayanta Bhatta in the 9th century can announce such a great scholar that his name will begin to make a shake, how are we going to understand his idea of logic and debate, then what do we make of the texts that are considered opaque, not very meaningful, and make fun of? But there are multiple points. I'll just give you one. If you desire to know something, whether it is diplomacy, whether it is a knowledge, whether it is some religious gyan, there are so many gyanis around, keep giving gyan, and these are 5-star gyanis, I call them, travel in luxurious cars and sit in that. I'm not making fun of anybody, but then you have to be a seeker. You have to seek the answer. And in that context, you have to frame the question in a way that you get the answer. This, I believe, also is a part of diplomacy. How actually you phrase your points of view. And there, in the Bhushan Sutta, there is a knowledge already. So the sage who is desperately seeking to get that knowledge is saying, Suvarnamayena Patrena Satyasya Mukhamabhutam Tanno Bhushana Bhavri. This is begging from the god Bhushan that I know, I have heard, as you might have heard reading and receiving, that this person or this place is full of knowledge. What do I do? Bhushan, you are the only one who will be able to give that knowledge. Why? Because I am bedazzled by the glittering lid of the golden pot in which this knowledge is kept. This is called institutions, people. So the Bhushan needs to unlid or uncover that pot, which is made of gold, and most of us exhaust our energy and perhaps aspirations just to look at the golden pot. Do not open it. And therefore, Tanno Bhushana Pavru, please open that lid for me. And that is where brings in this dialogue. Somebody has to initiate that dialogue. Even if you want to present something which is so opaque, so difficult for others to understand, you need to frame it in such a way. Since this is a department of English that has organized it, I'm reminded of a very great poet. Some of you might have read him thoroughly. I have read him almost completely, not that I understand it much. Shivashiri. There is a famous poem by him called The Now, this is an autobiographical poem, but it's the most powerful poem, which was cited in 1995 Nobel Prize citations. It's a long poem, but the last two lines I mentioned he mentions that he belonged to a very poor family. In Ireland, his father and grandfather were farmers, potato farmers particularly, because we normally associate potato with Ireland, and why, of course, potato famine and everything comes important in political discourse. So he says, my grandfather had the strength and knowledge to grow potatoes, not only grow potatoes, but also dig it. So he frames this poetry that my father, with a massive tool, is trying to dig deep and getting the potato out. My father too. Since I do not have the strength to do that, so he said, between my thumb and finger rests the squat pen with which I am digging. Now, the pen can be used as a digger of knowledge, as something, and this is why I'm trying to connect with this powerful mantra. Shubharnamaina patrena satyasya mukhavritam tanno bhushan. So when the question is asked, or when there is a requirement to answer that question, you do need to summon that courage or wisdom to frame the answers or frame the questions that you get an appropriate. And there is a long history of debate, of conversation in India, beginning, as I said, from the. And I'll make one more point and then I'll quickly stop because we all want to hear him. We in JNU are trained to teach for 2 hours, so we get warmed up after 1 hour. So we don't realize the time, but I must here respect the time. So the other conversation that I wanted to talk about is something that what do you do when the question is thrown at you? What do you do? It is not diplomatic enough to avoid a question or indulge in sophistry. Most famous diplomats come out with appropriate answer with their knowledge and wisdom. And I'm reminded of an 18th century South Indian Sanskrit poet, more or less unknown, who says, how should one answer a question, particularly for a teacher he's writing. And if a student has thrown a question at you, what do you do? And this is what a teacher should do, and I think this is the most appropriate place as an institution where the knowledge is disseminated, received, and given. That he says, if an audience asks a question, what should these people do? In this case, a teacher. Pathyatam, one answer could be, let us carry on. Do not interrupt my train of thought. That's what is Pachyata. Samayo nasti. There is no time for me today to think and answer the question. Second answer. And the third possible answer that person is Spashtam Agre Bhavishyati. Question will be automatically answered as we move on. Then the poet makes a and he said, Iti Bhashayata. If a speaker decides to talk like this, answer like this, there is no subject under the sun which she cannot teach. I'm deliberately using she because I don't want to say she, he. So, Iti Bhashayata Kathinyam Kutra Vartate. This is one aspect, and this is something that in Indian tradition has been abhorred. That you cannot avoid a question, which is where perhaps in some places diplomats work very well. They answer appropriately and sometimes they hide a portion of what they do not want to answer. So in this context, if you move on, the conversation and dialogue and debate. So the last point where I'll stop, which connects me with this book that is coming out next week, really as you can see the cover is here, is that what kind of diplomats do you want? I'm sure he has mentioned, or not I know he has mentioned a few diplomats. One, of course, is the dialogue that Krishna has in the Mahabharata. Krishna, even Jaishankar mentioned, along with Hanuman, were inspiration for diplomacy. I would add Angad as well and many others. I could add Bharat and many other contexts are there, but these are two prominent ones where Krishna is sent to Duryodhana as a messenger. This is the only thing he could offer to his friends, Pandavas, and the kind of dialogue that happens. Not only that, you read through this great epic Mahabharata, you will find the conversations, it is full of conversation, which is what he has exploited in modern international diplomacy in a way, how do we get inspired by our tradition? My idea always is that we must try and dive into the past, even if it is dark. These days we can have on telephone torch. But even if we cannot really get something very clearly in that, when we come back, at least certain amount of topography will be clear in our mind. We can reject what is not necessary and we can use what is necessary. And finally, therefore, if you look at the tradition that has been mentioned, Hanuman, of course, being Dr. Jaishankar mentioned that Hanuman was a great messenger because he could also burn down the enemy's domestic affairs if that enemy does something tricky. But that is for people like Amitabh Bhatt to handle in diplomacy. I just wanted to say this conversation, simple conversation, can yield a result, and almost every single Upanishad you begin reading, it begins with the most simple conversation. I just want to give you one sample that in almost every one of the Upanishads is simply called Prashna Upanishad. Nothing but question. Even being able to ask question, being able to frame a question, that makes for a very good diplomacy. Nachiketa, the 12-year-old boy, is asking question to his father, where you are giving away everything. But anyway, that's a long debate. And when he, in frustration, and also perhaps he was feeling mortified that his son is questioning him at such grand ceremony like this one. So he said, Pratyave Tvam Dasyami. A simple question, a 12-year-old curious question. Whom are you giving me? Because you are giving away old cows, which I use this. They don't have capacity to give milk. And the verse itself is very, I think it is extremely melodious. Pito dakaha, jagdhadranaha, dukkhadohaha, nirindriyaha, ananda namato nektiroka, tamsa gacchata. The 12-year-old boy is saying, where these cows are going, that is the Brahmins who are carrying these cows as gifts, old cows, whose horns are decorated with gold, but nothing more than that. So there is a message in that. So he concludes to me before his father, Ananda Namate Loka. The words that these cows are going to are sad. So is the person who has gifted them. Now, if that is the kind of conversation, and immediately once he hears his father that he has been gifted to the god of death, or Yama in this case, he approaches Yama, and this is the first conversation that even death can have. So I consider Nachiketa as one of the ambassadors. He forces Yama, the god of death, to speak about himself. So obviously there is one of the ways that you deal with the diplomacy, I think, is you need to hold a skill to communicate. And once you present yourself biographically, as some diplomats are, what they have done, this will be wonderful. But in any case, G20, the topic of today, I leave it to Professor Mattu, and as it has been said, that what it has achieved, one of the major things that I think it has achieved is the capacity of India to communicate with the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
I'm sure we all enjoyed the Oxford anecdotes as much as I did. We'll take on diplomacy as a conversation with truth and the power of conversation, alluding to the Vedas, Mahabharata, and Upanishad was highly insightful. Thank you so much. Professor Amitabh Mattu is currently the professor of disarmament studies at the Center of International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, School of International Studies. Recognizing his contribution to education and public life, the President of India honored Professor Mattu on the occasion of Republic Day with Padma Shri, one of India's highest civilian awards in 2011. His teaching and research interests include issues of international security, India's foreign policy, arms control, and disarmament. He has published 10 books on nuclear issues, foreign policy, and international relations, and more than 50 research articles, including journals like Survival and Asian Survey. He writes regularly for Indian newspapers, including The Telegraph and The Hindu, and is a commentator on television. He concurrently served as a member of National Knowledge Commission. Okay. We'd like to call Professor Martin to further enlighten us on India's presidency.
The point about having long biodatas read out, as Professor Hiraman Tiwari said, is that it raises expectations. You do not actually always match up to the expectations that are raised by what you are supposed to be on paper. Let me begin by first acknowledging all our great and eminent educationists and academics here, beginning with Professor Hiraman Tiwari, who is an embodiment of knowledge, of wisdom, and friendship. As he pointed out, we've known each other for 40 years, maybe, or 35 years, from those early days in Oxford to being neighbors in JD. We live almost a stone's throw away.
But not in the similar houses.
But if you follow, as you should, debates on Twitter or what's called X, you'll notice that I and Hiraman Ji often are mostly on the same side, but occasionally also sparring. But I refer to him as Guruji because he is really, in some ways, a teacher for me. Someone who taught me from those early days in Oxford about the importance of the Bhagavad Gita and about how you reconcile strategic choices and ethical dilemmas through the person of Lord Krishna himself. Because Lord Krishna seems to most of us who believe in binaries of good and evil extremely complicated. The advice he gives Yudhishthira, the advice or the counsel he gives Karna, on numerous occasions, it doesn't seem to be very godly advice. And he introduced me to his own teacher's writings, Bimal Krishna Makilal, who was then Spalding Professor of Eastern Religions, about an essay that he had written in defense of TV's divinity. And that article is something that all of you should read. But more importantly about Guruji, if I may refer to Professor Tiwari as Guruji, because he is my Guruji, is that I don't know a single person who has 2 PhDs from 2 of the most outstanding universities in the world. One from Delhi University and one from Oxford. Sometimes I reason that I couldn't even live through the torture of getting 1 PhD. You subjected yourself to the torture of having 2 PhDs.
I do agree with it.
But 2 PhDs, a polymath whose knowledge of language, knowledge of history, whose knowledge of Indian civilization and scholarship is only matched by his understanding of Western thought. Most of you, since this talk is being organized by the Department of English for some curious reason, are you all students from English?
Yes.
Okay, now a test for you because that embodies Guruji's life. What are the last lines of T.S. Eliot's Wasteland? Has anyone read The Wasteland?
Teachers and children.
Okay. Anyway, look up the last 3 words of the Wasteland, and those 3 words, driven from the Upanishads, embody his sense of philanthropy, his sense of scholarship, his complete self-control, the ideal path to which, at least Eliot thought, the ideal path towards nirvana. Can someone repeat those words if you have a Google search? Or maybe I request Dr. Deepshita, she doesn't teach Eliot obviously. Is Eliot taught here or no longer?
He is
wasteland was there when we were students.
Okay, tell us, ma'am, the last lines of the wasteland.
Shanti, Shanti.
Okay, before the last line. Penultimate line. Data. Anyway, look up what these words mean in the Upanishads and you will find a reflection in Professor Tiwari and his pathways. Of course, congratulate Professor Savita Rai and Dr. Deepshika and the Vice Principal, Dr. Nanda, and everyone else here who's part of this great college. I tried to read up as much as I could about this college because I like to make myself familiar. I know that it began as being called Pramila College and its name was changed to Daulat after a great philanthropist actually invested a lot of funds in setting up this college. Although, frankly, I couldn't find very much about Daulat Mukherjee, except that he was a freedom fighter who had earned a lot of money. It would be good to actually find out a little more about who this person was, how he came to invest so much in education, because he set up schools, he set up this college, and I know that it is a preeminent college for girls in Delhi University. So many, many congratulations. I would also like to thank in their absence the Council for Social Science Research, which has organized this lecture, and I'm delighted that they're actually carrying forward the research agenda to undergraduate colleges of Delhi University and elsewhere. I understand that all over India they're going to organize these lectures. And what better theme than to reflect upon than the G20 and G20's presidency in India's rise. In some ways, many of us have always believed in India's rise, have always believed in India's exceptionalism. And I, for instance, used to begin all my lectures on India and the world, whether it was teaching in India or abroad, by talking about Indian exceptions. And I used to talk about not just the fact of India being a civilizational state and the importance of that, but also in contemporary times, the fact that you have India as the only country which achieved independence from colonial rule, which survived and succeeded as a democracy. No other country had a similar trajectory of 200 years of colonialism and then established itself as a democratic republic and sustained that. And except for the dark days of the emergency, there's not been a period in which India has ever forsaken its commitment to democracy and all that it represents. People often say, why did India stay democratic? Why did India succeed as a democracy? And as political scientists, there are often a large number of explanations that are often given. I would like to, before I begin on the G20, see which one has a resonance with you. The first, often quoted, is that the accident of history, that you were gifted with a leadership which was deeply committed because of the freedom movement to democracy, and therefore that accident of having the wise leadership in the initial years institutionalized democracy. Whether it was Gandhi or Nehru or Patel or Savarkar, all the great leaders that we had during that initial period, and Shama Prasad Mukherjee was the first education minister of India. So all the pantheon of leadership that existed was so committed to democracy, and democracy as a way of thinking, democracy as a way of acting, that there was no question but that India would be a democracy. some people say, oh, that's paying too much tribute to just individuals. Individuals do not matter in history as much as the ideas do, as much as the larger forces, social forces do. And they point out that we were the only country which actually spent years establishing a constitution under the chairmanship of the drafting committee led by Bhimrao Ambedkar. That few other countries have such a long, elaborate constitution with checks and balances to ensure that there is beyond a point no encroachment on the functions of the legislation, executive and judiciary. And that it made the whole business of constitutional amendments, the constitution has made the whole business of constitutional amendments so difficult that the basic framework cannot be tampered with. And in any case, whenever the basic framework has been tampered with, the Supreme Court has declared it as null and void, as for instance in the Keshav Nanda Bharati famous case. Other people say, no, it's not really. Neither the benefit of a great leadership nor the elaborate constitution. They say it's the policy of reservations, our action. And of course, caste and reservation is in the news currently for the wrong reasons. But they say that affirmative action, the policy of reservation, allowed for the mobility of elite, so that at the popular grassroots level, you never had the degree of angst, anger, or violent rebellion as you had in countries where there was a tiny elite which kept governing. And that allowed for what C. Wright Mills would call a circulation of elite. The fourth explanation is counterintuitive. Is that it is the steel frame of the Indian bureaucracy, the IAS, or what used to be the ICS. It's counterintuitive because the ICS was created, famous words, to create a group of people who were brown in color but acted exactly like the white man. The idea was, how could that have been? And they were the most non-democratic institutions. You passed the exam and you stayed on until you superannuated. How could that have institutional democracy? But if you look at some of the examples from Latin America and Africa, you'll notice that newly elected leaders often take populist actions. But so you say, we'll throw the jails open, everyone who is being imprisoned by the British should be let scot-free, or let's give food grains free to everyone who needs it, and open the treasury, coffers of the treasury completely to the public. But bureaucracies which are reactionary, conservative, prevent that from happening. So counterintuitively, a conservative, reactionary bureaucracy prevented adventurous populist actions. So, perversely, the bureaucracies played a role in institutionalizing democracy. The final question, and the final reason often people give, which goes to the heart of what Professor Tiwari says, goes to the heart of what people describe as the idea of India, which often goes to the heart of someone who's not very popular, which is part of India. We question, we are heterodox by nature, we question even the existence of God. And if the only way you can govern India, you can keep them starving, you can deprive them of material pleasures, but if you deprive them of the right to dissent, of the right to exercise political choices, that's when they will rebel. So I have given you these 5 explanations. Which do you find the most satisfactory? Let me ask Professor Tiwari before deep dive into the G20, which Guruji would you find the most satisfying explanation to describe the exceptionalism of Indian democracy? The right, the argumentative gene, for a want of another word. What would you say? Any student brave enough to pick a. There's no right answer. They're all right answers. You just pick your own choice. Give me at least one answer before I move ahead.
Sir B.R. Ambedkar and the great leaders.
The Constitution.
Providing the choice to the people because India cannot be governed except
So
democracy.
you're going back to the.
Amartya Sen. Amartya Sen's explanation of depriving the public from their political choices. So democracy is that thing. That's why democracy has been institutionalized in India because of the choice.
To the majority, in terms of 4 people who have spoken, at least the majority seems to think it's the fact of the genius of the Indian people, the diversity reflected in this right to question, right to have a conversation, a dialogue. Because even on the battlefield of the Mahabharata, it is a conversation. There is no dictation. Because even at the end of what lessons that Krishna provides Arjuna, he says, final choice is yours. Guruji can of course recite that verse in which he actually, do you remember that verse in which he says the final choice is yours, I told you this.
I've told you everything.
Yeah. I've told you the most secret of truths, but ultimately what you do is your responsibility, your choice. So for many of us, India was always exceptional. But what the G20 has done in many ways is similar to what the Olympic Games did for China and Beijing in 2008. Announced the arrival of India. Announced the arrival of India as what is often described as an impresario. Impresario is a conductor of a musical orchestra. Someone who actually plays a role in determining how all these individual artists perform. Similarly, India has arrived as one of the impresarios of the international. The G20 itself, I think Dr. Deepshika pointed out, is important for a variety of reasons. These are the most powerful economies in terms of population and territory. She's given you the figures. They control more than 70% of the world's resources. And it's not just G20 now, it's G21. So it's coming of an age with the addition of the African Union. But throughout this period of the last 1 year, and the G20 presidency will only come to an end next month, India demonstrated 4 or 5 different things, and I want to actually reflect on these 4 or 5 things and hope that you will be also able to bring these to the discussion that follows my presentation. Born out of international relations when there was a financial crisis. The Western reaction, primarily by the Treasury Secretary of the United States and the Canadian Finance Minister, to get a bunch of economies together to reflect on the financial crisis. Out of that today, it's become probably the preeminent forum, and I would argue more important than the UN Security Council, the preeminent multilateral body which can reflect, which takes a stand on all major global pressing issues. Unlike the UN Security Council, it doesn't have a permanent secretariat. It's the presidency, it's whoever occupies that position, sets the agenda, sets up the organizational capabilities, and conducts and convenes the meetings. But unlike the Security Council, which has become a bureaucratic body, caught up in its own inertia, caught up in its own institutional practices, and burdened by history and the veto rights, G20 allows the freshness of thinking, lateral thinking often, which the UN system cannot often cope with. So G20, what India did was in the very act of convening all the summit to demonstrate its unique convening power. To be able to get the leaders of the most important countries, and the only being trying to snub India, even though the Britain, or Russia, because Vladimir Putin is worried that the West may arrest him for war crimes if he were to anyway be anywhere in the proximity of Western airspace, and also because he was preoccupied by the war in Ukraine. Every other country was represented. And represented in every function except Justin Trudeau, who decided to lock himself in a room in the Lalit Hotel. Apart from Justin Trudeau, everyone came to the dinners, the cultural festivals, the functions, the seminars. Of course, India has held similar summits. You've been a spokesman for the Third World Exam. You convened the NAM summit, at which there were pictures of Fidel Castro coming in, but that was a different era. That was part of Cold War politics, not a standalone India speaking to the world. That stage, let's face it, India was a kind of junior partner of the Soviet system. And you've had, of course, the Asian Games. Now India, apparently, today's newspaper says, is trying to make a bid for the 2036 Olympic Games. But to get the world's political and economic leadership, including the leaders of the Bretton Woods system, the IMF, the World Bank, and all the other financial institutions, and the top leadership in a single city together, quite apart from the logistical challenge, and probably a logistical nightmare for everyone else living in Delhi, but logistical challenge, it was a very fact that countries came to India. And came to India at the summit level for these few days, but throughout the last 1 year. I remember across where I live in JNU was the son of a faculty member who was part of the Youth Connect of G20, and he was one of the conveners. He was a young student. One day he asked me, come please, come and have tea with us. We're getting some delegates who are going to late tomorrow. Go there were 30, 40 young people from Buenos Aires, from Mexico City, from Dar es Salaam. And I said, how are you here? They said, we're flying to Ladakh tomorrow. I said, is this your first time? They said, this is the first time in India, it's fantastic. And what gave me even greater confidence, I said, so who paid for your travel? He said, all served by your foreign ministry business class fare from Buenos Aires to Leh. A sense of, you might say, oh, that's extravagance. I say this was a sense of confidence within India was beckoning the world. And in doing so, exposed them to not just the vitality of this capital city, but the breadth and depth, the genius within it. My family home is in Srinagar. I went there. Everywhere, of course, anywhere in India that you went during the last year, there was G20 mastered across the wall. But handicrafts, craftsmanship, cultural taboos. I mean, all the sorts of folk artists who came together. I mean, it was overwhelming even for people of Srinagar who are normally quite insular in these days. Similarly in Ladakh, similarly in Jammu, I guess similarly in any of the cities that that you visited. I think this, I mean, soft power is too belittling a term to describe this whole cultural experience that India provided to the rest of the world or the delegates who came to it. And returned, mostly speaking, as ambassadors. I haven't seen any single bad report coming out and saying, oh, India treated us poorly. So whether it was the youth, or whether it was civil society, or whether it was business to business, over the last 1 year, we were able to convene all these different focus groups together in various parts of India, from Kashmir literally till Kanyakumari. And connecting with the people of India. I mean, I'm not given to hyperbole. As I said, if Srinagar is a good example of a people who have long felt disaffected and alienated, and G20 suddenly connecting them to not just, or the G20 connecting them to not just the rest of India, but to the rest of the world, it's saying something. But if that ability to convene the summit and convene this 200 odd meetings all over India was one big achievement. The real achievement was getting a joint declaration. It's a declaration which is worked out on the basis of not majority, consensus. Not even, there's a difference between unanimity and consensus, or a sense of the house. Often, as a chairman, you can say, oh, my sense of the house was that everyone liked my lecture, but they liked Professor Tiwari's lecture better. That's just that's a sense of the house. I won't be that far. But then I would take a majority and say, okay, on the basis of the majority. But if I have to get a consensus, everyone has to agree. It was unbelievable even to the last day. If you speak to Amitabh Kant, who's a Sherpa, who actually helped negotiate this, he says it was, I thought it couldn't happen because on the war in Ukraine, India wanted to exercise its autonomy, its space, not condemn Russia, and yet not be seen as absorbing the war. Didn't want to lose a friend in Russia, it didn't want to be seen as justifying the war in Ukraine. And in the Bali Declaration, which had been held a year ago, they have not been able to arrive at a consensus declaration. But here was the respect for India and the genius of the Indian bureaucracy that they were able to arrive at a language which you should read. I have got the whole summit document which you should download and look because of the depth and the breadth of all the conclusions. They were able to arrive at a consensus at a time on which everyone thought that Ukraine is a zero-sum game. And everyone acknowledged the fact that this wouldn't have happened anywhere in the world except in India. And especially at a time like this, when India and New Delhi still have the space where Modi can call Putin and say war is not its solution, and call up Zelensky and say let's find a way, and even offer through back channels that let both the leadership and the Americans come to Varanasi and probably try and negotiate, because this war is frankly serving no one's purpose. First, the ability to convene. The second, the declaration itself. Third, the sheer audacity of some of the proposals which venture of ideas that they reflect. India is in a pathway of not just big ideas, but also recognition that comes with those ideas, and there are stakeholders willing to invest in that. This whole road, rail, ship link between India, the Middle East, and Europe. This crossing Saudi Arabia, going through Israel to Europe, through the Mediterranean to Europe. Who could have imagined this happening? And of course, it's possible that we never find fruition given what's happening in Israel and Gaza. But as a blueprint, as a vision, as a pathway for the future, this is audacious. But most importantly, I think, in terms of global impact, the fact that till yesterday, and yesterday I mean metaphorically, India was not counted in the same league as China. China, which has a GDP 3 times India's size, which has an export surplus 5 times India, where is India? For the first time, people were willing to recognize that India is an alternative to China. An alternative that they need to invest in. An alternative which provides a rule of law, which is in some ways more predictable, which has a political regime which is stable. And finally, that despite the hard realism that you can measure India's success with, the fact was that India retained its soul. And that's what makes India exceptional in terms of the G20. That after all, the first preamble statement and the slogan of the G20 was Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. One earth, one family, one future. And it was reflected in all the other goals, whether it was the Sustainable Development Goal, or the Biodiesel Initiative, or the large number of other initiatives, including the fact that unlike China, which has offered the BRI, and as a consequence of the BRI, has got so many people indebted to China, and in deep debt as well, like Sri Lanka, India has offered the JAM infrastructure, free of cost, which is the most mind-boggling, overwhelming initiative by India. What is the jam? Not strawberry jam. Can anyone say what is jam? Sorry? No, it's an application.
It's an acronym.
Jan Dhan Yojana, by which you get direct benefits, you can get a saving bank account, you get an overdraft facility, and accident insurance every Indian. Zero balance. A savings bank account, and in fact, an overdraft facility, Aadhaar, and a mobile platform to be able to access all these services. It has led to, in the words of the World Bank, 78% inclusion. You've done more in these last 10 years than you did in the last 60 years. And the India has offered this jam infrastructure, a soft infrastructure, to the rest of the South. So while you may or may not agree with the definition of the South, fact is that India represents today with its strengths the voice of the South, the voice of alternative to the Chinese alternative. And let's face it, you may be a detractor, you may be a follower, you may be a bhakt, or you may be a disciple. This summit had the imprimatur of Prime Minister Modi all over. And he actually, as far as I know, monitored every detail, ensured that every project was delivered on time, and called up every major leader to ensure their participation. I cannot, in my life or in my, as a student of international relations, can think of any other 1 year which has been transformative in terms of India's leadership or its rule. The only other example was when India conducted nuclear tests and suddenly we got propelled into the big league. But for that, initially, after the test, we faced sanctions from the West, we faced opprobrium, but unlike 1988 when those tests were conducted, today you only seem to be winning acclaim and appreciation. Let me stop there.
Your expertise and wisdom added immense value to our event, sir. Your insights on India being an exception were truly enlightening. I was truly intrigued by your perception on the power of questioning and how G20 has marked the arrival of India. So, after an enlightening session, we now open the floor for the question and answer session. As mentioned earlier, two best interjectors would be rewarded.
I'll ask you questions. Wait.
Somali Tripathi asks, INEC, Indian Middle East EU, has not mentioned China, certainly indicating as counter to China's BRI, also the absence of Chinese premium. Jinping has added more to the tension. How does the point of pillar of multipolarism and multilateralism or G20 fulfills this case? Will this impact India-China tensions?
Should I answer? Let me just take 2 or 3 questions together.
Next question is, G20 members are part of 80% emission of fossil fuels, and then there was no initiative for the agenda of net zero emission, which further shadows the UE conference approaching on climate and oil.
I think both these questions are related. One, of course, much will depend on the manner in which China reacts or responds. Xi Jinping is facing a large number of internal challenges, including slower economic growth and political challenges. Knee-jerk reaction would be that it will increase tensions with China. On the other hand, frankly, if Beijing realizes that there is potentially a win-win situation here, they'll be probably more accommodative of Indian interests rather than let India become even closer to the United States than it already is. But we'll have to wait and see. Climate change, I agree with you. I think that is the most pressing issue of our times. I think much more needs to be done. And hopefully we'll have the political will to be able to actually ensure that we move towards net zero. I could speak on it at greater length, but in the interest of time, I know that Professor Tiwari also has to have a meeting at 2 o'clock. 3 o'clock. Already. In the interest of my chief guest, you'll have to conclude it fairly quickly. Here's a meeting.
So we can take the last question already. Modern spice route, better known as the economic corridor, have been made to facilitate and
Sorry, go ahead.
modern spice route, better known as the economic corridor, has been made to facilitate and ease trade or have some hidden intention to checkmate China on BRI border road initiatives. Ishada Tripathi asks.
I think that it is much more, it's independent. You might see that the counter to BRI, but it offers a completely different alternative. It's richer in content, more broad-based, and in some ways less dependent on China's whims and fancies. Is that it?
One more question, sir.
I know.
As you all know that G20 highlighted the human suffering and negative added impacts of the two wars in Ukraine. It's obvious that it was civilians who suffer the most in the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. India issued the statement that we stand for Israel. As a country of Gandhi, is it valid to support war instead of bringing peace among the countries?
I think it's a difficult question. What kind of choices you have, and especially when you formulate foreign policy. Obviously, India has now a special relationship with Israel, and Hamas uh, initiated this war, and they were the ones who were the first to have attacked Israel. What you want to do in diplomacy is that once you establish your credentials, then you may have the space to be able to then moderate the actions of the other side as well. If India wants to carry influence with Israel, then, like everyone else, it has to condemn Hamas. You can have no sense of ambiguity that Hamas undermined the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian people are doing what it did. And if you want to now try and ensure that the Israeli response is not as fierce as Benjamin Netanyahu has promised, then one way of reaching out to Jerusalem is precisely by first condemn and then try and moderate.
Thank you so much, sir.
Oh, best question was oh, you should have told me. I think the last question on Hamas and Nando Gandhi gets the first prize.
This one Anuja from 30 English Office.
One more.
You have to read the other questions to them. If you have all the questions, I can read out with the questions that you have asked. Congratulations. Yes, I think so. You follow the someone else wrote the question? Okay. Okay, so I can put all the questions. I'll read them out and okay, now when striving to implement the theme of Vasudev Kutumbakam on the challenges, yeah, that gets the second prize.
Who is this person?
Congratulations.
Now we'd like to invite the Department of English on the stage.
For the photo.
To extend the token of gratitude to our esteemed guests.
Yeah, yeah.
Great President Parliament to kindly be on stage. And the student.
Right, this.
Student Union kindly be on stage.
Oh, thank you. Oh, excellent. Me too. Beautiful. As gracious and as beautiful as the principal. Jaldi. बाकी जगह पूरी दौलत कहाँ है guys?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the participants, there is a question for you as well. Kindly be seated.